The most dangerous person in the room is not the one who attacks you. The most dangerous person in any relationship, in any environment, in any season of your life, is the one who smiles at you while quietly dismantling your confidence from the inside out. That is a hidden truth that most people never receive, because they are too busy looking for enemies who announce themselves. But let me submit to you, the ones who do the most damage never announce themselves. They don't come with a warning label. They come with a compliment. They come with a need. They come wrapped in familiarity. And they position themselves so close to your life that by the time you feel the damage, you can't even identify where the wound came from. Now, I want to address something that most conversations about difficult people completely miss. Most of the discourse around manipulative and narcissistic personalities focuses on what they do to weak people. But there's a category of behavior, a specific and calculated strategy that these personalities deploy exclusively against people who are strong. This is the territory we are entering today, because you don't need motivation. You need revelation. And the revelation is this: the stronger you become, the more specific the attack against you becomes. Weakness attracts general neglect. Strength attracts targeted warfare. And if you do not understand the nature of that warfare, your very strength becomes the door through which destruction walks. Let me submit to you, the last dirty trick a narcissist deploys against a strong person is not cruelty. It is not rage. It is not exposure. Those weapons were used in the earlier stages of the relationship. By the time you have grown too strong for their control, by the time your identity has begun to solidify and your boundaries have begun to hold, the narcissist shifts strategies entirely. And this final strategy, this last move, is the one that destroys more strong people than any other. It is the strategy of manufactured worthlessness. They cannot break your back, so they go after your belief. They cannot stop your movement, so they plant a question inside your mind that slows you down from the inside. That question is this: are you sure you are who you think you are? That is the weapon. And it is devastating because it targets the one thing that strength depends on, which is a settled, unshakable sense of identity, where purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable, and where identity is not settled. Manipulation is undefeatable. This is not a motivational concept. This is a design principle. When a manufacturer produces a product, that product carries within its construction a defined set of capabilities, a defined set of limitations, and a defined set of optimal operating conditions. If you take that product and begin to describe it incorrectly, if you begin to tell it that it was made for something it was never designed to do, the product does not malfunction in a loud way. It malfunctions quietly. It begins to operate below its capacity because it is responding to a false description of itself. This is precisely what the final narcissistic strategy does to strong people. It does not shout. It whispers. It whispers, maybe you were wrong about yourself. Maybe what you call strength was arrogance. Maybe what you call boundaries was selfishness. Maybe what you call clarity was cruelty. And if those whispers find any unresolved soil inside your identity, they root and they grow and they begin to produce fruit that does not belong to your original design. The first principle I want to lay before you is this: strength without a settled identity is a target, not a shield. Hear this carefully. The common assumption is that strong people are protected from manipulation. That is false. That is dangerously false. Strength is not the same as rootedness. A tall tree is not automatically a rooted tree. Height and depth are two different qualities. You can be visibly successful, publicly capable, professionally accomplished, and still be internally uprooted at the level of identity, and a narcissist, particularly one who has observed you closely, does not look at your accomplishments. They look for the gap between who you perform and who you believe yourself to be, because that gap, however small, is the entry point. The application of this principle is straightforward. Before you can defend against the final strategy, you must do the internal audit, not of your achievements, but of your beliefs. What do you believe about yourself when no one is watching? What do you believe about yourself when you have failed? What do you believe about yourself when someone you trusted tells you that your version of you is wrong? If those questions produce anxiety rather than certainty, the work is not done. The tree is tall but not rooted, and a tall, unrooted tree in a strong wind falls with more destruction than a small, unrooted one. The second principle is this: a narcissist's final strategy is always deployed during your transition, not your decline. This is a critical correction that must land. People assume that when a manipulative personality makes their final aggressive move, it is because you are collapsing. It is because they sense weakness. That is incorrect. The final move, the most sophisticated and targeted attack, comes when they detect that you're about to permanently escape their influence. When you are in decline, they don't need to do anything. Decline serves their purposes naturally. But when you begin to rise, when you begin to solidify, when you begin to define yourself on your own terms, and your behavior begins to reflect that definition, that is when the final strategy is activated. Think about this through the lens of navigation. A ship that is drifting off course in the wrong direction does not trigger an alarm. But a ship that has corrected its course and is now moving with precision and speed toward the right destination, that ship triggers every defense system of those who benefit from it being lost. Your transition triggers the attack. Your clarity triggers the attack. Your correctness triggers the attack. And if you interpret the increase in attack as evidence that you are doing something wrong, you will stop your correction and return to the drift that kept them comfortable. Let me tell you about a particular quality found in the manufacturing of certain high-grade instruments. There is a category of precision instruments, tools designed for exact measurement, that require a calibration process before they can be used accurately. During the calibration process, the instrument is exposed to controlled conditions and its readings are compared against a known standard. What is fascinating is that during calibration, before the instrument settles into its correct range, its readings are often wildly inconsistent. They spike, they drop, they register values that seem completely unreliable. And an untrained observer watching the calibration process would conclude that the instrument is broken. They would look at the erratic readings and say, this thing doesn't work. But the engineer running the calibration process knows something the untrained observer does not know. They know that erratic behavior during calibration is not evidence of malfunction. It is evidence of a system coming into alignment. The inconsistency is part of the process. The spikes are not damage. They are the instrument finding its true range. Now, apply this to your life. When you're in the process of coming into alignment with your true identity, your behavior becomes inconsistent to people who were comfortable with your old patterns. Your new boundaries look like erratic behavior to people who benefited from your lack of them. Your new clarity looks like aggression to people who thrived in your confusion. And a narcissist, watching you calibrate, will declare that you are broken. They will point at the very process of your alignment and say, see, look how unstable you are. Look how inconsistent you have become. Look how you have changed. And unless you understand what calibration looks like from the outside, you will stop the process. You will abandon your alignment to preserve someone else's comfort with your dysfunction. The third principle is this. The final trick is always disguised as concern. This must be understood with precision. When the manipulation escalates to its final form, it never arrives wearing the face of an enemy. It arrives wearing the face of someone who cares deeply about you. It comes as a concerned conversation. It comes as a worried friend. It comes as a family member who is troubled by the changes they are seeing in you. It comes as a mentor who is questioning whether you have lost your way. The words used in this final strategy are carefully chosen. They are words like, I'm worried about you. I don't recognize you anymore. You become someone I don't know. People are talking about you. I just want to make sure you're okay. These are not neutral observations. These are precision instruments of destabilization. Each phrase is designed to do one thing: make you second guess your own growth. Because if they can make you responsible for their discomfort with your evolution, they have successfully relocated the problem from their control issues to your character. And the moment you accept that relocation, you are back in their territory. The application here requires discernment, not suspicion. Not everyone who expresses concern is operating manipulatively. But the difference is detectable. Genuine concern asks questions and listens to the answers. It supports your process even when it doesn't fully understand it. Manufactured concern does not ask questions. It delivers verdicts. It does not say, help me understand what is happening with you. It says, I'm telling you what is happening with you. And what is happening, according to their verdict, is that your growth is a problem. The fourth principle is this. Dominion over your own narrative is not arrogance. It is assignment. Let me develop this carefully, because this is a territory where strong people lose the most ground. There's a false teaching that has infected many minds. And it says that a person of genuine character should be open to correction from others, that they should hold their self-perception loosely. That humility requires them to receive external definitions of themselves without resistance. Now, there is a distorted truth embedded in that teaching. Genuine humility does include the capacity to receive legitimate correction. A person who cannot be corrected is dangerous. But let me submit to you, there is a profound difference between being correctable and being redefinable by anyone who chooses to redefine you. A product manufactured for a specific purpose does not become something else because a consumer misuses it and then complains that it isn't working properly. A hammer that is being used to stir soup does not need to reconsider its identity when it fails at that task. The problem is not the hammer's design. The problem is the misapplication of the hammer. When a narcissist declares that you are too much, too strong, too independent, too certain, too boundary, they are not offering you a correction. They are describing their own inability to use you the way they intended to. And if you receive that description as a character flaw, you will reshape yourself to fit an application you were never designed for. Dominion over your own narrative means knowing the difference between legitimate correction and redefinition through projection. It means being able to say, I hear your experience of me, and I am not responsible for reshaping my entire identity to resolve your discomfort with my design. Now let me bring a second teacher story into this. There is a phenomenon in certain bird species where the young bird, upon developing its full wing capacity, is pushed from the nest not gently, but forcefully. The parent bird does not create a gradual, comfortable transition into flight. It removes the comfort of the nest entirely. And the young bird, in the sudden absence of the only platform it has ever known, enters a state of complete disorientation. For a moment, it does not know what it is. It does not know what its wings are for. It has never used them in the context of open air. It has only felt them folded in the confined safety of a structure that no longer exists beneath it. And in that disorientation, everything instinctual activates. The wings open, the body aligns, the design that was always present but never tested in open space becomes functional reality. Here's what must be understood. The nest was not the bird's identity. The nest was the bird's incubation, the narcissistic relationship, the controlling environment, the manipulative structure that you grew up inside or that you allowed to form around you. That was your nest. And a nest is not a permanent home for a creature designed for open sky. The removal of the nest, however violent it feels, is not destruction. It is activation. And the disorientation you feel in the transition, the loss of familiarity, the loss of the structure that defines your daily reality. That disorientation is not evidence that you are falling. That is your wings opening for the first time in open air. The last trick the narcissist deploys is to convince you in the moment of your wings opening that you're falling. They name your flight a breakdown. They name your freedom a crisis. They name your expansion a loss. And if you believe their naming of your experience, you will fold your wings in the middle of your first flight. The fifth principle is this. You cannot negotiate your assignment with people who benefit from your limitation. This principle requires zero compromise in its application. There are people in your life who have built their significance on top of your smallness. Their identity as the capable one, the wise one, the strong one, the needed one, is constructed on a foundation of your dependency. The moment your dependency ends, their constructed significance collapses. And this is not something they do consciously in most cases. This is not a calculated scheme in the full sense. This is a self-preservation response. When you grow, they feel diminished not because you took anything from them, but because what they built was always borrowed from your limitation. Now let me submit to you. You cannot reassure that person into releasing you gracefully. You cannot negotiate with them for permission to expand. You cannot have a productive conversation about your growth with someone whose identity depends on your stagnation. Not because they are evil in essence, but because they are operating from a place of existential threat. And people operating from existential threat do not hear logic. They hear a threat. So when you attempt to explain your growth, they hear aggression. When you attempt to establish a boundary, they hear abandonment. When you attempt to define yourself, they hear rejection. The application of this principle is not cruelty. It is clarity. You release the need for their understanding. You release the requirement of their blessing. You move in the direction of your assignment, not because they approve, but because your design demands it. The tree does not ask the soil for permission to grow. It grows. and the soil either accommodates the roots or is displaced by them. That is not the tree's cruelty. That is the nature of growth operating in its proper function. The sixth principle is this. The one last dirty trick is designed to make you responsible for their reaction to your strength. And this is where we must be surgical. The final strategy of a personality that cannot control you is to position your strength as damage. Not damage to them in a factual sense, but damage in a moral sense. They will not say, I am unable to control you anymore. They will say, you have become hurtful. They will not say, your independence threatens my significance. They will say, you have become selfish. They will not say, your boundaries have made it impossible for me to use you. They will say, you have become cold and unreachable. Do you see the architecture of this? Every statement relocates the problem from their inability to tolerate your design to a moral failure in your character, and if your character is sensitive. If you have spent years believing that love requires constant self-sacrifice, you will receive these statements as truth. You will believe that your strength is actually cruelty, that your boundaries are actually neglect, that your clarity is actually arrogance. And in that belief, you will begin to dismantle the very qualities that your assignment requires. Let me be very clear about this. There is a version of strength that is genuinely harmful. Arrogance is real. Cruelty disguised as clarity is real. Abuse dressed in the language of boundaries is real. These things exist and they require correction. But the diagnostic test is this. Are you being asked to be accountable for a specific behavior that caused a specific harm? Or are you being asked to be ashamed of your general posture of self-knowledge and self-definition? Accountability is specific. Manipulation is general. Accountability says what you did in this moment caused this harm. Manipulation says who you are becoming is a problem. And if what you're becoming is a person who knows their value, operates within their design, and refuses to be used for purposes that contradict their assignment, then who you are becoming is not the problem. It is the solution. Their problem with the solution is their problem. Now let me bring a third story. There is a practice in certain forms of metallurgy where high-value metals are subjected to extreme heat in order to purify them. The heat is not applied because the metal is weak. The heat is applied because the metal is valuable. Base metals, metals of low value, are not put through this process. There is no economic justification for investing that level of energy and material that will not yield a return commensurate with the process. The heat is reserved for gold. The heat is reserved for silver. The heat is reserved for materials whose refined form is worth the cost of the refining. Now consider this. The level of targeted pressure that has been applied against your identity, the sophistication of the attacks, the specificity of the strategy. These things do not reflect your weakness. They reflect your value. A personality driven by a need to control does not deploy their most sophisticated strategy against people they consider insignificant. They don't bother. Insignificance is simply discarded. The sophisticated, targeted. Final strategy, the one we're examining today, is deployed exclusively against material they recognize as high value. You are not being attacked because you're broken. You are being refined because you are valuable. And the fire, however unwelcome, is doing a work inside you that no comfortable season could accomplish. The dross is being removed. The impurities of self-doubt, people-pleasing, identity confusion, and misplaced loyalty, these have been separated from the pure material of your actual design. This is not pleasant. It was never designed to be pleasant. It was designed to be effective. Now let me show you how to recognize the final move. Name it without drama. And walk forward without permission. The recognition is this. The final move always escalates precisely when your clarity increases. Track this in your own history, not just in this relationship, but in any controlling environment you have inhabited. Identify the moments when you became most certain about your identity and your direction. And then identify what happened in the environment around you immediately following that certainty. What you will find, without exception, is that the escalation of pressure, the sudden increase in criticism, the manufacture of a crisis that pulls your attention back into chaos. These things cluster around the moments of your greatest clarity. Because clarity is the threat, not your anger, not your conflict, your clarity. A person who is confused can still be managed. A person who has achieved a settled understanding of who they are and what they are designed for cannot be managed. And the system that was built on managing you responds to your clarity the only way it can, with escalation. Recognizing this pattern removes its power. Because once you understand that the attack intensifies when you're on course, the attack becomes a compass rather than a crisis. It tells you that you are moving in the right direction. It tells you that your alignment is being felt by those who benefited from your misalignment. The compass function of attack is only available to a mind that has been taught the principle. Every escalation looks like evidence that you're wrong with the principle. Every escalation looks like confirmation that you are right. The naming is the next step. And by naming, I do not mean confrontation. I do not mean announcing to the person, I know what you are doing. That accomplishes nothing. Naming is an internal act. It is the act of calling a thing what it is within your own understanding, so that you can respond to what is actually happening rather than to the costume it is wearing when the concern arrives. Name it. This is the final strategy. When the manufactured crisis pulls your attention, name it. This is a redirection tactic designed to interrupt my alignment. When the guilt is delivered, name it. This is the repositioning of my growth as a moral failure. The naming does not require malice toward the person. It does not require the conclusion that they are consciously evil. People can operate manipulatively without full consciousness of their own strategy. The naming is not about them. It is about you. It is about maintaining the clarity of your own perception in an environment specifically designed to cloud it, and then the walking forward. This is the most practical and the most difficult part. Because walking forward without permission, without the blessing of those who benefit from your stillness, without the understanding of those who are threatened by your movement, this requires a settled commitment to your design that most people have never been required to demonstrate before. Let me be precise about what walking forward means in the context of this final strategy. It does not mean walking forward in anger. Anger is a fuel that burns fast and damages your own vehicle. It does not mean walking forward in bitterness. Bitterness is a weight that slows you down more than any external resistance. It means walking forward in the calm, unwavering recognition that you were manufactured for a purpose, that your design is not up for renegotiation, and that the approval of people whose significance depends on your limitation was never a legitimate requirement for your movement. specific and practical. In the next 30 days, I want you to do 3 things. The first is to write down your own definition of yourself. Not what others have said about you, not the criticisms, not the compliments. Your own definition based on what you know of your design, your values, your capacities, your pattern of functioning when you are operating most authentically. Write it down. Put it somewhere you see it daily. Because the final strategy works by replacing your definition with theirs. The daily visibility of your own definition is a structural defense against that replacement. The second is to track the escalation pattern. Keep a simple record. When you make a clear decision aligned with your values, note it. And then note what response it produces in the environment around you. Not to build a case against anyone, not to confirm that you're a victim, but to develop the capacity to read the pattern. Because once the pattern is visible, it loses its ability to disguise escalation as random crisis. The third is to remove the requirement of understanding. This is perhaps the most liberating and the most difficult. You are not designed to need the understanding of every person in your life in order to move in the direction of your assignment. The requirement of their understanding. The waiting for them to see what you see. The hoping that they will eventually approve of the person you are becoming. This requirement is a leash. And it is a leash that you placed on yourself. Not because you are weak, but because you were taught that love requires consensus. It does not. Love can exist in the absence of consensus. Relationship can survive difference of perspective. But your assignment cannot be held hostage to another person's timeline of understanding. Release the requirement. Move. And trust that the evidence of a life aligned with its design is a more powerful argument than any conversation you could have about who you are. Let me bring this toward its conclusion with a declaration that must be received. You were not built for the version of yourself they preferred. You were not manufactured to fit their comfort, the strength they are threatened by, the clarity they are trying to cloud, the identity they are attempting to dismantle with their last calculated strategy. These are not flaws to be corrected. These are features of your original design. And the blueprint for your life, the original intent of your construction, was not written by the people who benefited from your limitation. It was written before the relationship began. It was written before the criticism arrived. It was written before the manufactured worthlessness took root. And your job in this season is not to become someone new. It is to return to someone original. To strip away the additions that were placed on you by people who needed you to be smaller, quieter, less certain, more manageable. To return to the unapologetic, settled, functional reality of your actual design. The pain of this season is not punishment. The pressure of this season is not evidence of failure. The attack itself, sophisticated and targeted as it is evidence of value. Diamonds are not cut with gentle hands. Steel is not strengthened in cool temperatures. And the strongest version of who you were designed to be is not produced in comfortable environments with easy approval and consistent agreement. It is produced in exactly the kind of pressure you are currently navigating. The refining process is working. The calibration is happening. The wings are opening in open air. Do not fold them because someone named your flight or fall. Here's a checkpoint system for the days ahead. Every morning before the noise of the day begins, ask yourself one question. Am I operating from my design today? Or from someone else's definition of me? That is a daily diagnostic. not a long meditation, not a complex ritual. One question. And the answer to that question determines the quality of every decision you make in the following hours when the escalation comes. And it will come. Do not interpret it as evidence against you. Interpret it as a compass reading confirming that you are on course. When the manufactured concern arrives, receive it with clarity rather than reaction. Name it internally. Respond from your settled identity rather than from the anxiety the strategy is designed to produce. And when the weight of their disappointment, their confusion, their withdrawal presses against you, remember the calibration. Remember the young bird. Remember the gold in the furnace. The process is not your enemy. The discomfort is not your enemy. The one who named your strength a problem is not even your real enemy. The only real threat to your assignment is the moment you agree with their assessment and begin to dismantle what you were built to be. You were designed for open sky. You were built for alignment with your deepest and most authentic function. And the one last dirty trick, the final strategy of those who cannot tolerate your strength, has one and only one counter move: become more of what you actually are. Not louder, not angrier, not more defensive, more settled, more certain, more aligned, more rooted. Because a deeply rooted tree is not threatened by wind. The wind may move the branches. The wind may make noise in the canopy. But the roots hold. And when the storm passes, the tree is still standing in the same place. Taller, stronger, and more certainly planted than it was before the storm began. This is not the season to become less. This is the season to finally, without apology, without permission, without the requirement of their understanding, become fully, completely, irreversibly what you were always designed to be. Be original, not a copy. Die empty. The time is now.